The county nailed the demolition notice onto Walter Boone's garage while people were still leaving his wife's memorial service. Snow blew across the church parking lot in sharp white streaks while the orange paper slapped against the old wooden door across the road. 3 hammer strikes. Everybody heard them. Nobody said anything. Walter stood beside his pickup holding a folded metal chair from the church basement. Melted snow darkened the knees of his jeans. His black tie sat crooked beneath his winter coat, the same way it always did when Evelyn wasn't around to fix it. Structure approved for demolition. Bright orange. Crooked. Evelyn would have hated that more than the notice itself. She believed small things mattered. Straight picture frames. Warm coffee. Porch lights left on during storms. Walter stared at the garage for a long moment. Then his phone buzzed in his pocket. For half a second, hope rose inside him. Claire. Maybe finally. He pulled out the phone. Unknown office number from Chicago. Not his daughter. Below her name sat the same unread voicemail from 9 days ago. Walter slid the phone away without listening to it again. Hell of a day for this, Frank Delaney muttered nearby. Walter looked over. Frank held out a paper coffee cup. You going tonight? Walter already knew what he meant. Town council meeting. The distribution center vote. The garage. Frank glanced toward the demolition notice. Evan Mercer's pushing hard. Walter accepted the coffee slowly. Heat pressed through his gloves. Yeah, he said quietly. I noticed. Nobody in Hadley missed Evan Mercer these days. 34 years old. Sharp haircut. Clean coats. Big plans for the future. According to Evan, old buildings were dead weight holding the town back. Maybe old people too. Wind moved through the parking lot with a low whistle. Frank lowered his voice. He says the garage stopped mattering 20 years ago. Walter looked back toward the building. Nobody had seen inside the final garage bay since Evelyn died. People talked about it anyway. Some thought Walter stored junk in there. Some thought grief had made him strange. A few thought the old mechanic was finally losing his mind. Walter never corrected any of them. By 6 o'clock, snow hammered against the windows of the town hall. Wet boots squeaked across old tile floors. Coats dripped melting snow onto folding chairs. Walter sat alone in the second row while people quietly avoided the empty seats beside him. At the front of the room, Evan Mercer stood beneath fluorescent lights with architectural drawings spread across a table. The distribution center would bring 82 jobs to Hadley, he said calmly. It would modernize the East County corridor and increase long-term revenue. People nodded. Some looked toward Walter. Most didn't. Evan folded his hands together. The only remaining obstacle is the Boone property near County Road 8. Obstacle. Walter noticed that word. Now, Mr. Boone has every legal right to his land, Evan continued politely. But eventually we have to ask whether sentiment is worth holding back the future of an entire town. Silence settled across the room. Snow rattled harder against the windows. Evan smiled carefully. That garage stopped mattering a long time ago. Nobody defended Walter. Not the farmers near the back. Not Louise from the diner. Not even Frank. People just looked down, and somehow that hurt worse than insults. Walter stood slowly. Evan paused, clearly expecting an argument, but Walter only picked up his gloves. Right before reaching the exit, he stopped beside the door. You learn something about people during winter, he said quietly. Nobody moved. Walter rested one hand against the frame. You find out who still leaves the light on for somebody else. Then he walked out into the storm. The farmhouse was dark except for the porch light by the time he got home. Walter never turned that light off anymore, not since Evelyn. Inside, the old house creaked softly around him. The coffee timer clicked on automatically in the kitchen. 2 mugs sat beside the pot. Blue for him, yellow for Evelyn. He still set out both every night. Some habits survived grief longer than people did. Walter removed his coat slowly. Evelyn's green winter coat still hung beside the back door. Small tear near the cuff. She had refused to replace it because she believed good things deserved second chances. Walter almost walked past it. Then he noticed something strange. A loose stitch near the inside lining. He frowned. Evelyn hated loose stitching. Always fixed it immediately. Walter pressed his fingers carefully against the lining. Something hard rested beneath the fabric. Outside, wind shook the windows. Walter reached inside the torn seam. A brass key slid into his palm. Cold. Heavy. Old. Underneath it sat a folded note in Evelyn's handwriting. Just 6 words. For the winter after I'm gone. Walter lowered himself slowly into the kitchen chair. The yellow mug remained untouched across from him. Snow drifted sideways outside now. For a long time, he stared at the key. Then toward the garage beyond the backyard. Then back to the note again. Near midnight, people living along County Road 8 noticed something strange. Lights were on inside Walter Boone's garage. For the first time in years, snow swirled across the dark fields while Walter stood inside the final locked bay with the brass key still in his hand. Dust floated through pale yellow light. Old tarps, fuel cans, shelves covered in shadow, and beneath one massive canvas sheet, something enormous. Walter stared at it silently, then his eyes drifted toward faded handwriting painted across the far wall. People freeze faster alone. Outside, the storm kept getting worse. Walter looked toward the hidden shape beneath the tarp. Then he whispered softly, "You knew this was coming, didn't you, Evie?" Walter Boone still woke up before sunrise, even though there was nowhere left he needed to be. At 5:30 every morning, the old clock radio beside the bed clicked softly to life with the weather report from Grand Island. Most days, Walter listened with his eyes closed while pale winter light slowly pushed through the curtains. Snowfall expected by Thursday. Wind advisory after midnight. Temperatures dropping below zero. The same warnings over and over lately. Beside him, Evelyn's side of the bed remained untouched except for the shallow fold in the blanket where the mattress had slowly sunk over time. Walter had tried sleeping on that side once after the funeral. Only once. The house had felt wrong afterward. He sat up slowly, joints stiff from cold and age, then reached for the hearing aid resting beside Evelyn's reading glasses on the nightstand. The glasses were still there because he couldn't bring himself to move them. Some mornings he forgot they belonged to nobody now. Those mornings were always the hardest. Floorboards creaked beneath his boots as he crossed the hallway. The farmhouse made different sounds in winter. Pipes knocked softly inside the walls. Wind brushed against the porch screens. Somewhere in the kitchen, the old refrigerator hummed like it was tired too. Walter switched on the coffee pot. The smell filled the kitchen almost immediately. Dark roast, Evelyn's favorite. 2 mugs already waited beside the machine. Blue for him, yellow for her. He still set them out every night before bed without thinking about it anymore. Maybe grief became routine after enough time passed. Maybe loneliness did too. Outside the kitchen window, snow drifted across the empty gravel road in thin white ribbons. Walter watched the wind move over the fields while coffee dripped steadily into the pot. Then he poured 2 cups. The yellow mug sat untouched across the table while steam slowly disappeared into the cold morning air. Walter listened to the weather report again. Another storm system moving south. Possible power outages. He glanced toward the back porch. 3 red fuel cans rested beside the wall exactly where he left them last night. A few minutes later, his old pickup rattled down County Road 8 beneath a gray winter sky. The heater barely worked unless Walter kicked the panel twice with his boot. Gravel cracked beneath the tires while frozen fields stretched endlessly on both sides of the road. Most mornings followed the same pattern. Louise's diner, hardware store, gas station, then back home before dark. Small-town people liked routine almost as much as old men did. The bell above the diner door jingled softly when Walter stepped inside. Warm air smelling like bacon grease and burnt toast wrapped around him immediately. "Morning, Walt," Louise called from behind the counter. Walter nodded once and slid onto the stool near the window. Same stool every morning for nearly 15 years. Louise poured coffee without asking. "You hear about Thursday's storm?" Walter wrapped both hands around the mug. "Heard enough." Louise lowered her voice slightly. "My sister in Lincoln says grocery stores are already running low on propane heaters." Walter looked out the frosted window. "People wait too long every year," he muttered. At the far end of the counter, 2 younger men from the feed supply store talked quietly while scrolling through their phones. "County's finally tearing that old garage down. Should have happened years ago." Walter drank his coffee without reacting. Louise heard it too. "You know people talk because they're bored," she said softly. Walter shrugged once. "Town's got plenty of empty buildings already. Guess mine just bothers them more." Louise opened her mouth like she wanted to say something else. Instead, she refilled his coffee. By afternoon, snow clouds had thickened across the county. Walter stopped outside a small farmhouse nearly 3 miles east of town. The porch sagged slightly beneath the weight of old winters. Wind chimes knocked softly together above the railing. Mrs. Hargrove opened the door before he knocked. "You didn't have to come all the way out here again," the old widow said. Walter carried the small heater unit inside anyway. "Your furnace quits during Thursday's storm. You'll freeze before county trucks ever reach this road." The old woman smiled sadly. "You always say things like that." Walter knelt beside the furnace, grease-darkened hands moving carefully over loose wiring. The basement smelled like dust, old blankets, and heating oil. After a few minutes, warm air finally pushed through the vents again. Mrs. Hargrove pressed a folded $20 bill toward him. Walter shook his head. "Just keep extra blankets upstairs. You can't keep helping everybody for free." Walter tightened the panel screws slowly. "Not everybody." The old woman watched him carefully. "You sound like Evelyn when you say that." For a second, Walter stopped moving. Then he closed the toolbox. Outside, the wind had grown sharper by the time he returned home. The porch light glowed warmly against the snow, even though dusk had barely settled across the fields. Walter left it on earlier these days. People lost their bearings faster during storms. Inside the kitchen, the answering machine blinked red. One new message. Walter stood there, listening to the furnace hum softly through the house. Then he pressed play. Static crackled briefly. "Dad, it's Claire." Her voice sounded tired, distant. "I got your messages. I've just been busy here." Silence. "I heard about the county meeting." Another pause. "You should probably think about selling the garage." Walter stared at the snow blowing past the kitchen window. Claire exhaled softly into the phone. "Mom wouldn't want you out there alone forever." The message ended. The kitchen suddenly felt colder. Walter looked toward the yellow coffee mug still sitting beside the sink from that morning, then toward the dark garage beyond the backyard. For a long moment, he said nothing. Finally, he grabbed his coat again. Outside, snow moved sideways beneath the porch light. Walter crossed the yard toward the garage carrying one of the red fuel cans. Halfway there, he stopped. The lights inside the final locked bay were already on. Walter frowned. He knew he turned them off before sunrise. Very slowly, he looked toward the shadowed window. Something moved behind the dusty glass, then disappeared. Walter did not run toward the garage. At 79, a man learned the difference between urgency and panic. Panic wasted breath. Urgency saved it. He stood in the snow with the red fuel can in his right hand, eyes fixed on the dusty window of the final bay. The light inside glowed pale yellow through years of grime. For a second, he thought maybe the wind had moved something. A hanging tarp, a loose chain, a shadow from the trees. Then it moved again. Small, low, too quick to be wind. Walter set the fuel can down beside the garage door and reached into his coat pocket for the brass key. His fingers were stiff from cold, and the key slipped once before he caught it against his palm. "Easy," he muttered to himself. Evelyn used to say that to him whenever he rushed a repair. "Easy, Walt. Metal tells you what it needs if you stop forcing it." The lock clicked open on the second try. Walter lifted the door just high enough to duck inside. The garage smelled of dust, old oil, cold rubber, and something faintly electrical. Light buzzed above him. The big canvas tarp still covered the shape in the center bay. Tools hung on the far wall exactly where he had left them years ago. Wrenches by size. Sockets in labeled drawers. Timing lights wrapped in clean loops. Walter saw the movement near the workbench. A boy froze beside a stack of milk crates. Maybe 12. Thin coat. Red ears. One glove missing. Walter recognized him after a moment. Noah Briggs. Lived with his grandmother 2 houses down from Mrs. Hargrove. Quiet kid. Always riding a bike with a loose chain Walter had fixed twice without charging. Noah swallowed. "I wasn't stealing." Walter looked at him. The boy pointed toward the side window. "I saw the lights on. I thought somebody broke in." Walter glanced at the half-open window latch. "You came through there?" Noah nodded. Walter looked at the window, then back at the boy. "Fool way to enter a building." "I know. You could have cut yourself." "I know. You did cut yourself?" Noah looked down. A thin line of blood ran across his knuckle. Walter sighed, walked to the old metal cabinet, and pulled out a first aid tin. The tin still had Evelyn's handwriting on tape across the top. "Bandages, not bolts, Walter." For the first time that day, something almost like a smile touched his face. He cleaned Noah's knuckle without much talk. The boy watched the covered shape under the tarp the whole time. "What is it?" Noah asked. "Old project." "What kind?" "The kind that takes longer when people ask questions." Noah looked embarrassed and shut his mouth. Walter snapped the tin closed. "You tell anyone you were in here?" "No, sir." "Good." The boy shifted toward the window. Walter looked at him for a long second. Then he said, "Door's easier." Noah stopped. "You're not calling the sheriff? For climbing through a window to check on lights?" "My grandma says people call the sheriff for less." "Your grandma's not wrong." Walter walked to the center of the bay and grabbed the edge of the tarp. His shoulder complained when he pulled. His right knee stiffened. The canvas was heavier than he remembered. Noah stepped forward before he could stop himself. "I can help." Walter almost said no. Then he looked at the boy's thin coat, the bandage on his hand, the way he stood there trying not to seem too interested. "Grab that corner." Together, they pulled the tarp back just enough to reveal the front grille of an old yellow school bus. Noah's eyes widened. "Whoa." Walter said nothing, but the sound warmed something small inside him. The bus sat on blocks, tires low but not ruined, hood open, engine half exposed. Dust covered the windshield. Faded black letters along the side were too worn to read fully, but enough remained. Hadley County Schools. "My grandma rode buses like this," Noah said. "Most people did." "Does it run?" "Not yet." That was not the full truth. It had run once, years ago, before Evelyn got sick, before the garage went quiet. Before Walter started letting days pass without unlocking the last bay. Noah stepped closer. Careful now. Walter watched him study the engine. You know what you're looking at? No. Good. Means you might learn something. He handed Noah a flashlight and lifted the hood higher. The movement sent a sharp ache through his shoulder, but Walter kept his face still. See that belt? Noah aimed the light. This one? Not that one. Lower. The cracked one. Noah crouched. Oh. That snaps in weather like this. Engine overheats before you make it past the grain elevator. But it's freezing. Engines don't care what the weather feels like to people. Noah looked at him with real attention now. Walter felt it, that old feeling. Someone listening because he knew something worth knowing. He pointed to the battery terminals. Corrosion there, bad ground there, fuel line brittle. And somebody pulled the relay out. Somebody? Walter's face changed slightly. He leaned closer. The empty slot near the firewall stared back at him. He knew every inch of that engine. He could still rebuild one blindfolded if his hands cooperated. That relay had been there yesterday morning. He remembered checking it. Noah noticed the silence. Is that bad? Walter reached into the engine compartment and touched the empty bracket. Depends who took it. Outside, a truck slowed on the county road. Headlights swept across the dirty garage windows. Both Walter and Noah turned. The truck idled for several seconds, then drove on. Walter let the hood down slowly. The small warmth from a moment ago faded. Noah whispered, "Was that the county?" Walter didn't answer right away. He looked at the bus, the open toolbox, the brass key on the workbench, and the empty space where the relay should have been. Then he pulled the tarp halfway back over the grill. "Go home, Noah." "But..." "Now." The boy hesitated, then nodded. At the side door, he turned back. "Mr. Boone?" Walter looked over. "If you're fixing it tomorrow, I can come after school." Walter wanted to refuse. He should have refused. Instead, after a long silence, he said, "Bring gloves." Noah smiled once and disappeared into the snow. Walter stood alone in the buzzing garage light. Then he picked up the missing relay's empty mounting clip and held it in his palm. On its side, someone had scratched 3 fresh letters into the metal. Walter looked toward the road, and this time, he locked the garage from the inside. The next morning, the storm clouds still hung low over Hadley County, but the wind had finally eased. Walter noticed that before he noticed anything else. Farm people always did. He stood on the back porch holding a mug of coffee while pale sunlight pushed weakly through the clouds. Snow covered the fields in uneven drifts, smooth in some places, jagged in others where the wind had carved through during the night. The porch light still glowed above him. Walter reached up automatically to turn it off, then stopped halfway. For some reason, he left it on. Inside the kitchen, the yellow coffee mug still sat beside the sink from yesterday. Walter rinsed it carefully before placing it back near the machine. Not in the cabinet, near the machine. Ready for tomorrow morning. The old farmhouse creaked softly around him while the furnace hummed through the floorboards. Somewhere upstairs, a loose vent rattled every few seconds whenever the heat kicked on. Evelyn used to complain about that sound every winter. Then she would forget about it by spring. Walter found himself smiling faintly at the memory before catching it. Smiling still felt strange inside this house. By 8:30, the garage lights were on again. The warmth inside barely reached the far walls, but it was warmer than yesterday. Walter had repaired one of the old ceiling heaters before sunrise using spare wiring and a salvaged motor from a grain dryer 15 years earlier. Most people would have bought a new unit. Walter trusted old machines more than new ones. Noah arrived carrying gloves that were clearly too large for him. Walter noticed the duct tape wrapped around one thumb. "You own a coat that actually fits?" Walter asked. "No, sir." Noah stood awkwardly near the workbench. "You still want help?" The boy nodded immediately. Walter pointed toward a rusted toolbox near the shelves. "Sort sockets by size." Noah blinked. "That's it? If you can't organize tools, you shouldn't touch engines." For the next hour, the garage filled with small sounds that had been missing for years. Metal clinking, cabinet drawers sliding, radio static, someone moving around besides Walter himself. It changed the room more than heat ever could. Walter worked beneath the bus hood while Noah organized bolts into old coffee tins labeled in Evelyn's handwriting. "Brake parts. Keep. Not Junk. Walter." The boy laughed quietly at that one. Walter looked over. "She labeled everything?" "Everything." "Why?" Walter tightened a hose clamp carefully. "So I wouldn't throw out something important. You still did sometimes?" Walter grunted once, more than once. That earned another small laugh. For a moment, the garage no longer felt abandoned. Near noon, Walter slid beneath the bus with a flashlight clenched between his teeth. Cold metal pressed against his shoulders while he checked the fuel line connections one by one. His left hand cramped halfway through. Age did that now. Hands that once rebuilt engines all night suddenly forgot simple things halfway through the day. Walter closed his eyes briefly, until the pain eased. Then he kept going. Noah crouched nearby. "You okay?" Walter twisted another bolt loose. Question waste time. Noah considered that seriously. Then he handed Walter the correct wrench before being asked. Walter paused. Small thing. But he noticed. An hour later, Noah turned the ignition while Walter adjusted the carburetor manually. The engine coughed once, then died. Noah looked disappointed immediately. Walter didn't. Again. The second attempt lasted longer. The third shook the entire garage. Then suddenly, the old bus engine roared awake. Dust drifted from the ceiling beams. Noah jumped backward laughing. Walter grabbed the hood edge to steady himself while deep mechanical vibrations rolled through the concrete floor beneath his boots. For one perfect moment, the whole garage felt alive again. The engine sound filled the room like something waking from a very long sleep. Walter stared at the dashboard. The old voltage needle slowly climbed upward. Steady. Charging. Working. Noah looked at him wide-eyed. "You did it." Walter kept one hand resting against the hood. "No," he said quietly. "It did." But inside his chest, something loosened for the first time in a long while. Evelyn used to love that sound, an engine finally catching after days of work. She always said machines wanted to survive if somebody cared enough to listen. Walter shut the engine down after less than a minute. Too risky to push it yet. Still, it ran. That mattered. Outside, snowmelt dripped steadily from the roof edge by afternoon. Water tapped against old metal buckets near the side door. Noah stood near the shelves eating tomato soup from a thermos while Walter cleaned grease from his hands with a rag already stained beyond saving. "You really drove this thing before?" Noah asked. Walter nodded once. "County routes. In storms? The worst ones." Noah looked toward the windshield. "Weren't you scared?" Walter folded the rag slowly. Scared and useful beats safe and useless. The boy grew quiet after that. Later that afternoon, while searching through storage cabinets for replacement relays, Noah accidentally knocked over a stack of old root binders. Paper scattered across the concrete floor. "Sorry." Walter crouched carefully beside him. Most of the papers were old maintenance records, fuel logs, repair receipts, weather reports. Then Walter froze. One photograph had slipped loose from between the binders. Black and white, edges cracked with age. Noah picked it up first. A younger Walter stood beside the same bus during a snowstorm decades earlier. Beside him stood Evelyn wearing her green winter coat. And between them, a third person. A woman Noah didn't recognize. Across the bottom, written in faded blue ink, were 3 words. "For Lena Ruzzi." Walter took the photograph too quickly. Noah noticed. "Who's Lena?" Walter stared at the picture. Outside, wind rattled softly against the garage doors again. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he slid the photograph into his coat pocket. "That's enough for today." Noah looked confused. "But we almost fixed." "That's enough." The warmth inside the garage seemed thinner suddenly. Walter crossed to the workbench and opened one of the lower drawers, searching for the relay inventory notebook Evelyn used to keep. The drawer jammed halfway. Walter frowned and pulled harder. Something underneath blocked it. Noah stepped closer. "What is it?" Walter reached inside carefully. His fingers brushed cold metal. Not a tool. Not a notebook. A small locked box sat hidden beneath the drawer compartment. Walter stared at it silently, then slowly turned it over in his hands. Stamped across the lid were the same initials scratched into the missing relay bracket. The photograph stayed in Walter's coat pocket until morning. He did not leave it on the kitchen table. He did not tuck it into the county binder. He did not set it beside Evelyn's yellow mug where he might have to look at it every time he reached for coffee. He carried it because that was what men like Walter did with old pain. They carried it. By sunrise, the farmhouse sat under gray winter light. The floorboards creaked beneath his boots. The coffee pot hissed on the counter. Wind scraped along the porch screens, soft and steady, like fingernails across old wood. Walter finally took the photograph out. The edges were cracked. The colors had faded almost completely. A younger Walter stood beside the old county school bus, grease on his cheek and snow on his cap. Evelyn stood beside him in her green winter coat, one hand resting against the bus door. Between them stood a woman Walter had not seen in more than 30 years. Lena Mercer. Across the bottom, in Evelyn's blue ink, were the words, "For Lena Ruzzi." Walter touched the writing with his thumb. Then the memory came back, not all at once, but in pieces. The sound of children crying behind fogged glass. Diesel choking and deep cold. Evelyn's voice on the church basement phone saying, "Walter, don't you dare tell me it can't be done." It was January of 1987, the year winter seemed to settle over Hadley County and forget to leave. The storm came before dawn. By noon, Main Street was empty. By 2, power lines had started to sag. By 3, the school sent children home early, hoping to beat the worst of it. Route C never made it past Miller's Bend. Walter heard the call over the radio inside Boone Repair while changing a fuel pump on a county truck. School bus stalled near the ravine. Children aboard. Visibility almost gone. He remembered wiping his hands on a rag. He remembered Evelyn appearing in the garage doorway with her coat already buttoned. "You heard?" she asked. Walter nodded. "Can you fix it?" "Depends what broke." That wasn't my question. He looked through the open bay door at a wall of snow moving across the road. "You want me to go out in that?" Evelyn held his eyes. "I want those children to come home." So Walter went. He drove the service truck with tire chains, 2 batteries, spare belts, a can of diesel treatment, and the thermos Evelyn pushed into his hands before he left. Less than a mile from town, the road disappeared. Fence posts became shadows. Ditches vanished beneath white drifts. At Miller's Bend, the school bus sat angled toward the ravine, hazard lights blinking weakly through the storm. Inside were 23 children, 1 driver with frostbitten fingers, and Lena Mercer, a young mother who had been volunteering at the elementary school that afternoon. She had wrapped her coat around 2 little boys and was leading the children in a song to keep them calm. Walter remembered that most, not the cold, not the fear, the singing. Small voices shaking through the glass. He worked in the snow until his hands stopped feeling like hands. The diesel had gelled. The battery was nearly dead. A belt had split halfway through. None of it was impossible alone. But together, in that cold, it was enough to kill people. Back in town, Evelyn had already done what Evelyn always did. She had turned the church basement into a shelter before anyone gave her permission. She called farmers with tractors. She called women with soup pots. She called the hardware store for lanterns, blankets, kerosene, candles, and every spare thermos in town. When the church secretary asked who authorized it, Evelyn said, "The weather." By dark, the basement was full of people who had almost been forgotten. Old Mr. Greeley from the North Road. The Hargrove sisters. 3 families from the trailer park where the power had failed first. Nobody had made a list for them, so Evelyn started one. That was the thing about her. She did not wait for systems to care. She built smaller ones that did. The bus finally started after sunset. Not clean, not strong, but running. The regular driver's hands had gone numb, so Walter took the wheel. Lena Mercer sat 2 rows behind him with a child asleep against each shoulder. "You got us?" she asked. Walter looked through the windshield at the road he could barely see. "No," he said, "but I know where the ditches are." He drove by memory. Fence line. Cottonwood tree. Broken mailbox. Rise before the culvert. He knew that county the way some men knew hymns. Every dip, every slope, every place snow raced the road first. When the bus reached the church, lanterns were already glowing outside. Evelyn stood at the bottom of the steps in her green coat, holding the door open, not for one person, for all of them. Later that night, after the children were safe and the drivers had coffee in their hands, Walter found Evelyn at their kitchen table. Her coat hung near the stove, dripping snow onto a towel. The yellow lamp was on. A notebook lay open in front of her. "What's that?" Walter asked. "A list." "Of what?" "People nobody remembered until the weather got bad." Walter said nothing. Evelyn kept writing names. Then she said, "Next time, we don't wait for the storm to tell us who's alone." That was where the promise began. Not with a speech, not with money. Just a notebook, a cup of coffee, and Evelyn writing names under lamplight while the county slept. Back in the present, Walter sat at the kitchen table with the photograph in his hand. The yellow mug across from him had gone cold. He turned the photograph over. On the back, beneath Evelyn's neat handwriting, was another line he had forgotten. Route C, closed, no record of incident. Walter frowned. That was wrong. There had been an incident. 23 children. 1 driver. Lena Mercer. A bus near the ravine. A church basement full of lanterns and soup. He stood slowly and took the old county maintenance binder from the pantry shelf. The 1987 section was still there. Route A, Route B, Route D, Route E. Walter stared at the gap. Route C was gone. Someone had removed the page. By noon, the missing Route C page was still spread across Walter's mind like a bad weather map. He had checked the binder twice. Then a third time. Route A, Route B, Route D, Route E. No Route C. No mention of Miller's Bend, no stalled school bus, no 23 children, no Lena Mercer, nothing in the county file but clean paper and silence. Walter sat at the kitchen table with the old photograph beside his coffee mug, staring at the empty space in the binder as if the missing page might return if he waited long enough. It did not. At 1:30, tires crunched over the gravel drive. Not Frank's truck, not Noah's grandmother. This was newer, smoother. The kind of engine that didn't rattle because someone paid extra so it wouldn't. Walter looked through the window. A black county SUV stopped beside the garage. Evan Mercer stepped out wearing a dark wool coat and polished boots. Beside him was a woman Walter did not recognize, mid-50s, gray suit, leather folder tucked under one arm. They did not come to the house first. They went straight to the garage. Walter watched Evan study the demolition notice still nailed to the door. The woman took photographs with her phone. Then she pointed toward the roofline, the foundation, the old gas pump, and finally the final bay. Walter stood slowly. His right knee caught on the first step down from the porch, but he kept walking. By the time he reached them, Evan had put on his polite public meeting smile. "Mr. Boone," he said, "I hope we're not disturbing you." "You are." The smile stayed in place, but only because Evan had practiced it. The woman stepped forward. "Mary Ann Cole, legal consultant for Prairie Line Development." Walter looked at her hand, then at her face. He did not shake. Mary Ann lowered her hand without offense. That made her worse somehow. Professional people rarely needed anger. They carried paperwork instead. "We wanted to speak with you before formal action proceeds," she said. Walter glanced at Evan. "Formal action usually means trouble. It means process," Mary Ann replied. "The county has determined the structure is unsafe. Prairie Line has offered to purchase the parcel at above market value. Frankly, Mr. Boone, it is a generous offer." "How generous?" Evan opened his folder. $280,000. Walter said nothing. Evan continued. Softer now. "That land hasn't generated business income in years. The building needs a new roof, updated wiring, environmental inspection, foundation work. You know that better than anyone." Walter looked toward the garage door. He did know. Every leak, every rusted hinge, every weak board. He knew what the building had become. He also knew what was inside it. Mary Ann's voice remained calm. "At your age, taking on legal costs over a condemned commercial structure is not advisable. If you sign voluntarily, you retain control of the sale and avoid additional county fees." There it was. Polita. Practical. Cold. Evan added, "No one wants this to be ugly." Walter looked at him then don't make it ugly. For the first time, Evan's smile slipped. Only a little. Mary Ann opened the leather folder and removed a packet. "This is a voluntary transfer agreement. It does not require a decision today, but the offer expires Friday at 5 p.m. Friday. 4 days. Walter looked down at the packet. The paper was clean, white, heavy, expensive. The kind of paper people used when they wanted taking something to look reasonable. "No," Walter said. Evan blinked. "You should read it first. I heard enough. Mr. Boone, you came to buy what you don't understand." The wind pushed snow dust across the driveway. Mary Ann remained composed. "With respect, understanding the sentimental value of the property does not change the structural assessment." Walter nodded slightly. "Sentimental value? That what they're calling it now?" Evan's jaw tightened. "This town needs jobs, Walter. Young families are leaving. Storefronts are empty. Tax revenue is down. We cannot keep sacrificing the future to protect every old memory." The words were not cruel. That made them harder to hate. They even made sense, in the way numbers made sense when nobody asked what they left out. Walter looked past Evan to the garage windows. Inside, behind dirty glass, the shadowed shape waited under canvas. "What did your mother tell you about Route C?" Walter asked. Evan went still. Mary Ann glanced at him. "My mother?" "Lena." Something moved across Evan's face too quickly to name. Confusion first, then annoyance. "My mother died when I was 16, he said. "I don't know what that has to do with this." "She ever talk about the winter of '87? Evan's expression hardened. "I'm not here to discuss family history." "No," Walter said quietly. "You're here to erase it." For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then Mary Ann tucked the agreement back into her folder. "Friday at 5, she said. "After that, the county may proceed with emergency abatement. You would be responsible for certain costs if demolition requires enforcement." "How much?" "That depends on equipment, disposal, environmental review, and security. It can become expensive quickly." Walter understood the sentence beneath the sentence. "Sign now, or lose more later." Evan took one final look at the garage. "I hope you think carefully," he said. "Pride gets costly." Walter held his chaza. "So does forgetting." Evan looked away first. They returned to the SUV, leaving 2 sets of footprints in the snow and 1 envelope tucked into the garage door handle. Walter waited until the vehicle disappeared down County Road 8 before removing it. Inside was the formal notice. Inspection order. Access required. Thursday, 9 a.m. Walter read it twice. Then he went into the garage. The air inside smelled colder than usual. Noah was not there yet, but one of his oversized gloves sat on the workbench where he had forgotten it. The old bus waited beneath the tarp. The empty relay bracket still bothered Walter like a missing tooth. He crossed to the lower drawer where they had found the locked box. No initials on the lid. No label. Just old metal and 1 narrow keyhole. Walter tried the brass key from Evelyn's coat. It fit. The lock opened with a soft click. Inside were folded route maps, brittle with age, and 1 small envelope marked in Evelyn's handwriting. If they come for the garage. Walter's breath caught once. He did not open it immediately. Outside, another vehicle slowed on the road. Walter turned off the workbench light. Through the dirty window, he saw the county SUV stopped near the ditch. Not parked. Watching. Walter closed the box and slid it beneath the workbench. Then the garage phone rang. That phone had not rung in 8 years. Walter stared at it. 1 ring. 2. 3. Finally, he picked it up. A woman's voice crackled through the line. "Mr. Boone? This is county compliance. Your inspection has been moved up." Walter's hand tightened around the receiver. "To when?" "Tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. The line clicked dead. Walter stood in the dim garage, listening to the storm wind move against the doors. Tomorrow morning, and the bus still could not run. The next morning, the county SUV did not return. That alone felt strange. Walter still woke before sunrise, expecting headlights on the gravel road, expecting boots on the porch, expecting another notice nailed to the garage door. Instead, the farmhouse sat quiet beneath fresh snow. The old clock radio muttered weather warnings into the dark bedroom while wind brushed softly against the siding. Walter lay awake listening to the furnace hum through the floorboards. Winter storm watch upgraded. Heavy accumulation expected. Possible whiteout conditions by Friday night. Walter stared at the ceiling for a long moment before getting up. The kitchen smelled like coffee before dawn fully reached the windows. The blue mug sat beside the yellow one like always. Walter poured both out of habit, then carried his own cup onto the porch. Cold air bit immediately at his face. Across the yard, the garage lights still glowed faintly through the side window. He had forgotten to turn them off again. That bothered him less than it used to. By 8 o'clock, Noah arrived carrying a paper grocery bag against his chest. Walter looked at it suspiciously. "What's that?" "My grandma said you probably forgot groceries." "I didn't forget groceries." Noah handed him the bag anyway. Inside were canned soup, bread, bacon, coffee filters, and 2 small apples wrapped carefully in newspaper. Walter stared at the apples longer than necessary. Mrs. Briggs grew apples once. Years ago, before the trees froze. She send all this? Noah shrugged. She said old men get stubborn when storms come. Walter grunted softly. "Your grandma talks too much. She says you do too little." For a second, Walter almost smiled. Inside the garage, warmth drifted farther now that the repaired heater had been running 2 straight days. The old radio on the shelf played low country music through static while Noah sorted tools beside the workbench. Outside, snow moved steadily across the fields. Inside, the garage no longer sounded empty. That mattered more than Walter expected. By mid-morning, Frank Delaney appeared carrying a dented slow cooker wrapped in towels. Walter looked at him. Frank looked at Walter. "Louise made chili," Frank said. "Said if I didn't bring it over, she would." Walter stepped aside without answering. That counted as an invitation. The smell filled the garage almost immediately after Frank plugged the cooker in near the heater. Chili powder, onion, beef, warm food in cold weather. For a little while, the garage felt less like a hiding place and more like something alive again. Frank wandered slowly around the bus while Noah handed Walter socket wrenches beneath the hood. "You really getting this old thing running?" Frank asked. Walter tightened a fuel clamp carefully. "Trying." Frank nodded toward the tarp folded nearby. "Town says you finally lost your mind." "Town said that 20 years ago, too." "That's true." Noah laughed quietly before catching himself. Frank noticed the boy organizing tools. "You training him?" Walter did not look up from the engine. "Kid listens more than most adults." "Love bar." That earned a real smile from Walter this time. Small, quick, but real. Around noon, the 3 of them ate chili sitting on overturned buckets near the workbench. Snow tapped softly against the garage doors while steam rose from paper bowls. Noah pointed toward an old photograph pinned near the shelves. "You and Miss Evelyn?" Walter looked over. The photograph showed Evelyn sitting on the garage workbench holding a wrench twice too large for her hand. Grease streaked across her cheek while she laughed at something outside the frame. Frank smiled when he saw it. She hated that picture. Walter nodded once, said her hair looked ridiculous. It did. Walter stared at the photo another second. She still kept it. That quiet settled over the garage after he said it. Not painful. Yes, full. Noah studied the photograph again. She looks nice. Walter looked down into his bowl. She remembered people, he said softly. Frank glanced toward him. Walter rarely talked about Evelyn directly. She remembered birthdays, storms, broken furnaces, which houses lost heat first every winter, which old folks lied about being fine. He paused. Town used to do more of that. Nobody answered immediately. The radio crackled softly in the background. Finally, Frank said, "Town got tired." Walter folded his spoon into the empty bowl. "No," he replied quietly. "Town got busy." For a while after that, they worked without much conversation. And somehow the silence felt good. Noah cleaned corrosion from battery terminals, while Frank repaired a cracked cabinet hinge near the shelves. Walter adjusted wiring beneath the dashboard, movements slower than they used to be but still steady. 3 people moving around one warm room while snow fell outside. The kind of afternoon Evelyn would have loved. Near dusk, Noah found an old coffee tin beneath the passenger seat. "Hey, Mr. Boone." Walter slid out from beneath the dashboard. "What?" The boy held up the tin. Inside were folded index cards covered in Evelyn's handwriting. Names, addresses, medical notes, wheelchair, needs oxygen, lives alone. Frank's expression changed immediately. Walter took the tin carefully. For a second, nobody spoke. Then Frank looked toward the bus. This wasn't just about fixing an engine, was it? Walter closed the lid slowly. Outside, headlights appeared through the snow beyond the garage windows. Not one vehicle. 3. They moved slowly down County Road 8 before stopping near the mailbox at the end of the drive. Noah stepped closer to the window. "Who's that?" Walter already knew. The county inspection team had come a day early. And this time, they hadn't come alone. The county inspection team never made it past the driveway that night. The storm came in too fast. By the time the 3 county trucks turned around on County Road 8, snow had already erased the tire tracks behind them. Walter watched the headlights disappear through the garage window while wind shoved white sheets across the fields. Frank let out a long breath. "Well," he muttered, "guess God bought you another day." Walter looked back toward the bus. "One day's enough if you use it." The next morning, the garage woke earlier than the farmhouse. By 7 o'clock, the old ceiling heaters rattled steadily overhead. Coffee steamed from 3 different mugs on the workbench. Snowmelt dripped from boots near the side door while country music crackled softly through the radio. For the first time in years, the garage sounded like a place people belonged in. That alone felt dangerous. Noah arrived carrying a hand-painted wooden sign tucked beneath one arm. Walter frowned at it. The boy held it up proudly. Boone Repair and Transport. The letters were uneven, the paint slightly crooked, but the missing word beneath the old garage sign was there again. Transport. Walter stared at it longer than Noah expected. "My grandma helped paint it," the boy said carefully. "We figured the old sign looked lonely." Frank barked out a laugh from beneath the bus. "Looks better than the original." "No, it doesn't," Walter muttered. But he did not tell Noah to take it home. An hour later, the 3 of them stood outside in the cold hanging the restored sign above the garage doors. Walter's shoulder burned halfway up the ladder. Frank steadied it from below. Noah handed up nails one at a time. When the sign finally settled into place, the garage looked less abandoned somehow. Less like a building waiting to die. Walter stepped back into the snow and looked at it quietly. Evelyn would have cried over something like that. Not loudly, just enough for her eyes to shine. Inside, the old bus slowly came back to life piece by piece. Noah learned how to clean battery corrosion properly, without damaging the terminals. Frank rebuilt one of the cracked bench seats near the back. Walter repaired wiring beneath the dashboard, while old snowstorm records sat open across the workbench beside him. The bus engine started 3 times that afternoon. The 3rd time, it stayed running. Deep vibrations rolled through the concrete floor while warm air finally pushed weakly through the overhead vents. Noah grinned so hard his cheeks hurt. Frank slapped the bus side twice. "There she is." Walter rested one hand against the steering wheel while the engine idled. The sound filled the garage like memory returning. For a moment, he could almost see Evelyn sitting on the workbench again with grease on her cheek, smiling every time the engine caught. Machines wanted to survive. She always believed that. Near noon, Louise arrived carrying cardboard trays filled with grilled cheese sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. "I figured if half the town's hiding out here now, somebody should feed you idiots." Frank pointed toward Walter. He's still charging us rent. Walter ignored him. Louise wandered slowly around the garage while Noah proudly showed her the repaired heater, the restored sign, and the working dashboard lights. When Noah flipped the switch and the old interior bus lights flickered on one by one, Louise stopped smiling for a second. Rows of warm yellow light filled the dark bus cabin. Not bright, not modern, but alive. Walter noticed Louise looking away quickly afterward. She would have loved this, she said softly. Nobody asked who she meant. That afternoon, something else happened. Mrs. Hargrove arrived with 2 blankets. Then Pastor Ben came carrying lanterns from the church basement. Then a farmer, Walter barely knew, dropped off a portable generator just in case. Nobody stayed long. Nobody explained much. But one by one, people kept showing up. By evening, the garage no longer felt hidden. It felt remembered. Walter stood near the workbench watching Noah help Frank install one of the repaired seats. Too tight, Frank grumbled. It wiggles. It's supposed to wiggle. No, it ain't. Walter listened to them argue while the smell of motor oil, soup, coffee, and cold winter air mixed together beneath the garage lights. The sound settled somewhere deep inside him. Not happiness, exactly. Something older. Something closer to home. Later that night, after everyone else left, Walter remained alone inside the bus. Snow tapped softly against the windows while dim interior lights glowed above the empty seats. He sat behind the steering wheel with Evelyn's notebook open across his lap. Names filled page after page. Elderly. Lives alone. Needs insulin. No family nearby. Check after storms. Walter turned another page slowly. At the bottom, written in different handwriting than Evelyn's, was one sentence. If county access fails, use Route C. Walter frowned. He had seen those words before. Not in the notebook. Somewhere else. Then he remembered. The hidden maps inside the lockbox. He stood carefully and crossed the garage toward the workbench drawer. The old wood creaked as he pulled the lockbox free again. Inside were folded county maps marked in red pencil. Fuel stops, farm roads, emergency shelter points, and one route running across the North County fields toward Miller's Bend. Route C. Walter spread the map open beneath the workbench lamp. Something was wrong. The route line ended near an old maintenance depot several miles outside town. A depot that had supposedly burned down decades ago. Yet beside the location, Evelyn had written, "Supplies still stored below." Walter stared at the words. Below what? Outside, tires crunched suddenly across the gravel drive. Walter looked up immediately. Headlights swept across the garage windows. Not county trucks this time. A flatbed tow truck. Behind it sat a sheriff's cruiser. Walter's stomach tightened. The tow truck stopped directly in front of the garage. The sheriff stepped out first, snow blowing around his boots. Then, Evan Mercer climbed slowly from the passenger side. He looked toward the restored sign hanging above the garage, toward the lights, toward the bus, and finally toward Walter standing inside the doorway. Evan's expression hardened slightly. "You should have taken the offer," he said. Behind him, the tow truck driver began lowering the steel ramps. The steel ramps hit the snow with a sound that made everyone in the garage go quiet. Not loud, just final. Walter stood in the doorway while cold air moved around his legs and into the warm room behind him. The bus lights glowed over his shoulder. The restored sign hung above the doors, fresh paint still uneven where Noah's hands had shaped the letters. Boone Repair and Transport. For one afternoon the garage had looked alive again. Now a tow truck sat in front of it like a hearse. The sheriff stepped forward first, hat low against the wind. "Walter, Sheriff." Sheriff Dan Lowe looked older than he had at the town meeting. Maybe it was the weather. Maybe it was the paper in his hand. "I don't like this," he said quietly. Walter looked at the tow truck. "But you brought it." Dan did not answer right away. Evan Mercer stood beside the cruiser with his coat buttoned neatly and snow gathering on his shoulders. He looked uncomfortable, but not uncertain. That was worse. Marianne Cole, the legal consultant, stepped out of the back seat carrying a clipboard. "Mr. Boone," she said. "The county inspection order was moved up due to projected severe weather. The structure has been classified as an immediate access risk." "Access risk," Frank muttered behind Walter. "That's new." Marianne ignored him. "The vehicle inside must be removed pending structural review." Noah stepped out from behind the workbench. "You can't take it." Everyone turned toward him. His voice shook, but he stayed where he was. Marianne's face softened in the way adults softened when they did not intend to listen. "This is not a confiscation. It is a safety measure." Walter looked at Evan. "You send a tow truck for safety?" Evan took a breath. The storm warning changed everything. If that roof comes down, if fuel leaks, if someone gets hurt inside that building, the county is liable. "That bus isn't county property." "It was," Evan said. "Originally." Walter's eyes narrowed. Marianne glanced at her clipboard. Our records show the vehicle was part of the Hadley County school transport fleet and was never properly transferred after decommissioning. Frank barked a dry laugh. Now you found records? Evan's jaw tightened. Walter did not move. Inside his chest, something cold and heavy settled. They had no Route C page. No C then record. No Lena. But they had found ownership paperwork for a bus that had been sitting dead for decades. Funny how paper appeared when it could take something. The sheriff shifted his weight. Walter, I'm asking you to let them hook it up without trouble. Walter glanced back into the garage. The bus sat under warm light, half repaired, imperfect, old, but running now. Noah's tools lay on the floor. Louise's sandwich wrappers still sat near the trash can. Frank's slow cooker cord was coiled by the heater. Small things. The kind Evelyn believed mattered. Walter stepped aside. Noah's face changed. Mr. Boone? Walter did not look at him. The tow driver started toward the bus with heavy chains in his gloved hands. Each step sounded wrong on the concrete. Walter watched him pass the workbench, the old photographs, Evelyn's labeled coffee tins. The driver reached the front bumper and crouched down. Then he stopped. Can't hook it like this, he called out. Marianne frowned. Why not? Steering's locked and front assembly's not fully set. You pull it wrong, you'll crack the frame. Walter spoke without raising his voice. You'll bend the axle first. The tow driver looked back at him. You know that for sure? Walter nodded once. Built that front end twice. The driver stood and wiped snow from his beard. I'm not damaging equipment. I'm not insured to move. Marianne's calm expression thinned. Evan stepped forward. What are the options? Flatbed winch from the rear, maybe, the driver said. But not through that door with the angle and snowpack. Need the south bay cleared. The south bay was blocked by 20 years of shelving, old tires, spare engines, and half the history of Walter's working life. Marianne turned to Walter. Then clear it. Frank moved first. Now hold on. Walter raised one hand. Frank stopped. Walter looked at the legal consultant, then at the sheriff, then at Evan. The room felt suddenly too warm. His shoulder throbbed from yesterday's work. His chest tightened slightly beneath his coat, not enough to scare him, but enough to remind him he was old. Old enough that standing still took effort sometimes. Old enough that losing a building could feel like losing a body. For a moment, the fight went out of him. He sat down slowly on the workbench stool. The whole garage seemed to watch. Noah's face went pale. Mr. Boone? Walter rested both hands on his knees. He looked at Evelyn's photograph pinned near the shelf. Grease on her cheek. Laugh caught forever in a square of fading paper. He could almost hear her. Not dramatic. Not soft. Practical. If you're going to sit, Walt, sit long enough to think. So he did. Snow tapped against the garage roof. The old heater rattled overhead. The tow truck idled outside, breathing diesel into the cold. Then Walter noticed something. The county seal on Marianne's order. He leaned forward. Let me see that paper. Marianne hesitated. Sheriff Dan took it from her and handed it over. Walter read slowly. His eyes were not what they used to be, but 50 years of repair invoices and county forms had taught him how paperwork lied. The order named the garage structure, the fuel tanks, the abandoned equipment. It did not name the bus. Walter looked up. You got authority to inspect the building, he said. He held the page out. Not take what's inside it. Marianne stepped forward. That vehicle is relevant to the inspection. Relevant isn't ownership. Evan's face flushed. This is not the time to play legal games. Walter stood again, slower this time. I'm not playing. The sheriff read the order himself. His mouth tightened. Marianne's silence told the truth before she did. Finally, Dan handed the paper back. He's right. Noah let out a breath. Frank smiled without showing teeth. Marianne closed her clipboard sharply. This delays nothing. The county will return with an amended removal order. When? Walter asked. Tomorrow afternoon. Outside, the storm wind rose hard enough to shake the garage doors. Evan looked past Walter at the bus lights glowing in the dim room. You're running out of time? Walter folded the inspection order once and placed it on the workbench. Then he turned toward Noah. Get your gloves. Noah blinked. What? Walter looked at the blocked south bay, the old shelves, the parts, the bus, the storm pressing closer outside. We've got until tomorrow afternoon, he said. Then he reached for his toolbox. So we used tonight. The storm reached Hadley County just after midnight. Wind slammed against the garage walls, while snow swept across County Road 8 in long white waves. Inside, every light in the garage burned warm against the darkness. Walter stood beside the workbench listening to the old bus idle steadily behind him. Running. After all those years, It was finally running again. Frank wiped grease from his hands with a rag. No way that tow truck gets through tomorrow if this keeps up. Walter barely heard him. His eyes stayed on the envelope lying open beside the Route C maps. If they come for the garage. Evelyn's handwriting. Noah noticed Walter staring at it. You gonna read it? Walter nodded once. Then he unfolded the letter carefully. The garage grew quiet except for the engine rumbling softly nearby. Walter began reading aloud. If you're opening this, it means they finally came for the garage. The heater rattled overhead. All these years, people thought we kept the bus because we missed the past. Walter paused briefly, but the bus was never the important part. Frank frowned slightly. Walter kept reading. The important part was the route. Noah looked down at the maps spread across the bench. Evelyn's handwriting covered nearly every margin. Fuel stops, medical notes, road conditions, church supplies, backup shelter locations. Walter turned the page. After the winter of 1987, the county decided emergency winter support cost too much money, too much liability, too many roads for too few people. Louise shook her head softly, but storms didn't stop coming. Walter's voice roughened slightly as he continued. So we built our own network. Now the whole garage felt different somehow. The fuel cans beside the wall, the blankets Mrs. Hargrove delivered, the lanterns from Pastor Ben, the names inside Evelyn's notebook. Everything connected. Walter unfolded one of the hidden Route C maps across the workbench. Red pencil lines stretched across the county roads toward isolated farms and trailer homes. Noah stared at it. You guys were planning rescue routes. Walter nodded quietly. Every winter. Frank leaned closer to the map. She kept all this updated? Till the year she died. Nobody spoke for a moment. The bus engine hummed behind them like a heartbeat. Walter looked back down at Evelyn's letter. If they're trying to take the garage now, it means they still don't understand what this place was built for. Then something slipped from the envelope onto the workbench. A folded county document. Sheriff Dan picked it up first after stepping through the side garage door. Snow dust still clinging to his coat. Walter looked up. Didn't hear you come in. Storm covered it. Dan unfolded the paper slowly beneath the lamp. Then his expression changed. What is it? Frank asked. Dan looked at Walter. This is an official county authorization. He turned the document around. Emergency Winter Access Partnership Route C. Approved January 1988. Noah blinked. So the county knew? Walter stared at the paper silently. Dan flipped to the second page. Attached beneath the approval was a recommendation report signed by 3 county officials. One signature stopped Walter cold. Harold Mercer. Evan's father. Louise looked confused. Wait, Lena Mercer? Walter nodded slowly. The woman on the bus. Now everything fit together. Why Evelyn kept the photograph. Why the Route C files disappeared. Why the county buried the records afterward. Harold Mercer had approved the emergency network after the Miller's Bend storm, but later administrations erased it quietly instead of funding it. Too expensive. Too inconvenient. Too easy to forget once winter passed. Walter looked around the garage. At the fuel cans. The supply lists. The repaired bus. The restored sign hanging above the doors. Everything Evelyn built had survived because she refused to let people disappear after storms. Noah stared toward the bus seats. All this time, he whispered. Walter folded the letter carefully. She knew winter would come again. Outside, headlights suddenly appeared through the blowing snow. Multiple vehicles. Frank moved toward the window. They're back. County trucks rolled slowly into the driveway, followed by the flatbed tow truck and Sheriff Dan's cruiser. But Dan was already inside the garage. That changed things immediately. Walter watched Evan Mercer step out into the storm, holding a new removal order in one gloved hand. Then Evan stopped, his eyes locked onto the county document resting beneath the workbench light. Sheriff Dan held it up slightly. You might want to look at this before anybody touches that bus. Snow whipped sideways through the open garage door. Evan stepped inside slowly. Marianne followed close behind him. Walter handed over Evelyn's letter without speaking. Evan read silently at first, then slower. The garage stayed quiet except for the wind and the steady rumble of the bus engine. Walter watched Evan's expression change little by little. Confusion. Recognition. Then something harder. Regret. Finally, Evan lowered the pages. My father approved this? Sheriff Dan nodded. Looks that way. Evan stared toward the Route C maps spread across the bench, toward the names written in Evelyn's careful handwriting. Mrs. Hargrove, North Trailer Park, insulin. Wheelchair. Lives alone. Real people. Not county numbers. Not liability reports. People. Walter spoke quietly. Your mother rode that bus into town during the Miller's Bend storm. Evan looked up sharply. She never told me that. She probably thought somebody kept the records. Outside, Snow hammered harder against the garage roof. The storm had fully arrived now. Then the radio crackled loudly from the workbench shelf. Emergency advisory for northern Hadley County. Multiple roads closed. Power outages expanding east of Miller's Bend. County crews unable to reach several isolated residences at this time. Nobody in the garage moved. Walter looked toward the bus, then toward the maps, then at the people standing around him. The exact storm Evelyn had spent 30 years preparing for was finally here. Sheriff Dan looked at Walter slowly. "You planning to use Route C again?" Walter reached for his coat hanging beside the workbench. Then he picked up the bus keys. "If the county still can't reach them," he said quietly, "somebody has to." Evan watched him in silence, and for the first time since this began, he no longer looked at Walter Boone like an old man standing in the way. He looked at him like someone the town had forgotten too long. For several seconds, nobody moved. The storm roared outside the garage doors while the old bus idled behind Walter, warm and steady, as if it had been waiting all these years for someone to finally ask the right question. Sheriff Dan looked at the emergency advisory on the radio, then at the Route C map, then at Evan Mercer. "This isn't a removal anymore," Dan said quietly. Marianne Cole opened her mouth, but no words came out. Evan still held Evelyn's letter in one hand. Snow melted from his coat onto the concrete floor. His eyes kept moving between his father's signature, the map, and the list of names. Real people, not property lines, not liability. People. Walter reached for the bus door. Frank stepped in front of him. "You're not driving alone." Walter looked at him. "I know the route. And I know when an old man's lying to save everybody trouble." Noah stepped forward immediately. "I'm coming too." "No," Walter said. "Yes." Noah replied before fear could catch up to him. "I know where the supplies are now." Louise took the wrapped sandwiches from the workbench. "Then take food." Pastor Ben appeared in the doorway with 2 lanterns under his coat. Behind him came Mrs. Hargrove's nephew with blankets. Then one of the farmers from the back of the town hall walked in carrying chains for the tires. Walter stared at them. People who had looked down days ago now stood inside his garage with wet boots, red hands, and quiet faces. Nobody made a speech. That made it better. Frank took the chains from the farmer. "Where'd you get these?" "My combine shed," the man said. Figured Walter might know what to do with them. Walter looked at him. The farmer lowered his eyes slightly. Should have said something at the meeting. Walter held his gaze for a moment, then nodded once. That was enough. Sheriff Dan moved to the workbench and picked up the radio microphone. "Hadley Dispatch, this is Lowe. I'm suspending enforcement action at Boone property pending emergency response. We have a working transport vehicle and Route C documentation." Static answered first. Then a woman's voice crackled through. "Dan, county crews are stuck near Miller's Bend. We've got 3 medical calls east of the ravine." Walter unfolded the map. "Mrs. Hargrove first," he said. "Oxygen." The old widow stiffened near the heater. "I'm right here, Walter. Your spare tank isn't." She stared at him. Then her eyes filled. "You remembered that?" Walter did not look up from the map. Evelyn did. That silence moved through the room differently, like a hand on every shoulder. Evan looked at Mrs. Hargrove, then at the notes beside her name. "Oxygen. Back tank in bedroom closet. Check fuel. Lives alone." His face changed again. Not dramatically, not enough for forgiveness, but enough to show the truth had landed somewhere painful. Marianne closed her folder. For once, the paperwork had nothing useful to say. The first rescue run left 10 minutes later. The bus rolled out of the garage with chains biting into snow, headlights cutting 2 yellow tunnels through the storm. Frank sat beside Walter with the map open across his knees. Noah sat 2 rows back, guarding the supply crate like it was treasure. At the end of the driveway, more headlights appeared. Pickup trucks. 3 at first. Then 5. Then more. Farmers, neighbors, people from the diner. Men and women who had said nothing while Evan called the garage an obstacle. Now they followed the old bus into the storm. Not because anyone ordered them, because somebody finally showed them where to go. Walter drove by memory. Fence line. Cottonwood tree. Broken mailbox. Rise before the culvert. The same markers from 1987 appeared and disappeared in the snow like ghosts that still knew the way home. At Mrs. Hargrove's place, 2 men cleared the porch while Louise carried soup inside. Noah found the oxygen tank exactly where Evelyn's note said it would be. At the North Trailer Park, Pastor Ben and Sheriff Dan helped a young mother and her baby into one of the pickup trucks. At the Greeley farm, Frank got the generator running with 1 hard pull and a curse Walter pretended not to hear. Each stop changed something. A porch light flickered on. A frozen door opened. A face appeared behind glass. The town that had forgotten how to check on itself began remembering house by house. By 4 in the morning, The garage had become the shelter Evelyn once imagined. People filled the work area wrapped in blankets. Coffee brewed on a camping stove. Louise passed out sandwiches. Mrs. Hargrove sat near the heater holding both hands around a cup. Noah stood beside the bus, snow in his hair, smiling like he had grown 2 years older in one night. Then Evan walked in carrying a crate of medical supplies from the county truck. Nobody thanked him. Nobody needed to. He set it down near Walter and stood there with his hands empty. "My mother was on that bus," he said. Walter looked up from the map. "Yes." Evan swallowed. "She never told me. Maybe she thought you'd know anyway." That hit harder than Walter meant it to. Evan looked toward the people sheltering inside the garage. "I thought this place was keeping the town from moving forward." Walter folded the map once. Sometimes forward starts with remembering who got left behind. Evan lowered his eyes. For once, he had no clean answer. Near dawn, the wind finally began to ease. The garage doors were still open enough for people to come and go, and cold blue light touched the snow outside. Walter stood near the doorway watching porch lights flicker across the distant road. "On everyone." Not all of them, but enough. Frank came to stand beside him. "You look tired." Walter breathed out slowly. "I am. You should sit." In a minute, Noah appeared with the yellow mug from the farmhouse kitchen. Walter looked at it. "You went inside my house?" "No, Luis did." The mug was filled with coffee. Walter took it carefully. For 2 years, that mug had sat untouched across from him. Now it was warm in his hands. He looked back at the garage full of people, not empty, not forgotten, not tonight. And for the first time in a long while, Walter Boone did not feel like the last person keeping the light on. 3 weeks after the storm, somebody finally took down the demolition notice from Walter Boone's garage. Nobody ever admitted who did it. Walter found the orange paper folded neatly beneath the porch light one morning, weighed down by a small wrench from his old toolbox. No note, no apology. Just gone. Snow still covered parts of Hadley County, but the roads had opened again. Tire tracks cut through the fields. School buses moved slowly along the highways in the mornings. Smoke rose from farmhouse chimneys instead of emergency burn barrels. Life had started moving again, but not exactly the same way. The garage lights came on before sunrise now almost every day. Not because Walter could not sleep, because people kept showing up. Some came for repairs. Some came for coffee. Some came because storms had reminded them what loneliness felt like. Walter never asked which reason brought them there. By 7:30 most mornings, somebody was already inside the garage warming frozen hands around a mug while country music crackled softly through the old radio. The restored sign still hung above the doors. Boone Repair and Transport. The crooked lettering bothered Walter less now. Noah arrived before school nearly every morning wearing a coat that finally fit. Mrs. Briggs had patched the sleeves twice already, because the boy kept catching them on engine parts. Walter pretended not to notice. Inside the final bay, the old Route C bus sat fully repaired beneath warm overhead lights. Not hidden anymore. The county had officially suspended demolition proceedings, pending historical review, though everyone knew Sheriff Dan, and half the town had pushed for it after the storm. Evan Mercer signed the delay order himself. That surprised people most. Walter had not spoken much with Evan since the night of the storm. Sometimes the younger man stopped by the garage with county paperwork or supply requests for isolated roads farther north. He always looked slightly uncomfortable standing there, like someone walking into a room built by people he misunderstood too late. But he kept coming back anyway. That mattered. One cold morning in February, Walter found Evan replacing burned-out bulbs above the side workbench without being asked. "You wired that backward," Walter muttered from beneath the bus hood. Evan frowned at the fixture. "No, I didn't." The light immediately died again. Frank laughed so hard he nearly spilled coffee across the floor. Even Walter smiled a little at that one. The garage had changed sounds over the past weeks. Less echo. More voices. Tool drawers opening. Coffee brewing. Boats crossing concrete. People staying longer than they meant to. The place Evelyn once built quietly for emergencies had become something else now. Not just a shelter. One afternoon, Walter found Noah sitting inside the bus copying names from Evelyn's old notebooks into a new binder. "What are you doing?" Walter asked. The boy looked up. "Making cleaner copies." Walter sat slowly in the front seat across from him. Sunlight glowed through the windshield onto dust-free floors and repaired seats. The heater hummed softly near Walter's boots. Noah flipped another page. Miss Evelyn wrote down everything. She usually did. The boy hesitated. "You think people really forget each other that easy?" Walter looked through the windshield toward the garage doors, standing open to the snowy road. For a long moment, he listened to the sounds outside. Louise arguing with Frank. Sheriff Dan laughing about something near the coffee pot. Someone dropping a wrench. The ordinary sound of people staying. Not on purpose, Walter said finally. Then how? Walter thought about the church parking lot after Evelyn's funeral. The silence. The demolition notice. People looking away. Then he looked around the warm bus filled with names, maps, blankets, and repaired seats. You just forget slower if somebody keeps the light on. Noah wrote that sentence quietly in the margin of the binder. Later that evening, Walter walked back to the farmhouse carrying the yellow coffee mug in one hand. The porch light glowed warmly against the snow. Same as always. But the house no longer felt quite as empty when he opened the door. Claire sat at the kitchen table. Walter stopped short. His daughter stood slowly, nervous in a way he had not seen since she was little. I called first, she said softly. Frank told me where you were. Walter hung his coat carefully by the door, near Evelyn's green winter coat. Claire looked at it too. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then Claire glanced toward the yellow mug in Walter's hand. You still make 2 cups? Walter looked down at it. A bit. Claire's eyes filled slightly before she looked away. I should have come sooner. Walter nodded once. Yes. No anger. No speech. Just truth. Claire swallowed hard. I didn't understand why you stayed. Walter sat carefully across from her at the table. Outside, snow moved softly beneath the porch light. Most people didn't. Claire smiled sadly at that. Then she reached into her purse and placed something on the table between them. A small photograph. Walter picked it up slowly. Claire as a little girl sitting inside the old Route C bus beside Evelyn, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. Written across the bottom in blue ink were 3 words. Keep them warm. Walter stared at the picture for a long moment. Then he set the yellow mug beside it carefully. Not across the table anymore. Beside it, outside, headlights appeared slowly on County Road 8. Another truck turning into the driveway through fresh falling snow. Walter looked toward the window automatically. Claire noticed. Someone coming? Walter listened to the distant crunch of tires approaching the garage. Then he stood. Probably. Claire watched him pull on his coat again. You going back out there tonight? Walter glanced toward the porch light glowing softly against the storm. Then toward Evelyn's coat near the door. Then finally toward the road where someone else had come looking for warmth. Yeah, he said quietly. And this time, he wasn't going alone.